The Last Lantern. There was a quiet village at the edge of a dense forest, where mist hung low over the fields each morning, and the nights were filled with the sound of crickets and the distant hoot of owls. In this village, where everyone knew one another's names and stories, lived an old man named Elias. Elias was a man of few words, with a weathered face that held the weight of countless seasons. His back was slightly bent, his beard a thick blanket of white, and his eyes, though clouded with age, still sparkled with a warmth that made children less afraid of him, and grown folk silently respect him. He lived alone in a small wooden house at the end of the village road. The house was surrounded by wildflowers, a faded wooden fence, and a single, ancient oak tree whose branches reached for the heavens, as though trying to touch the stars. Nobody quite remembered when Elias had first arrived in the village. Some said he was born there. Others claimed he wandered in as a young man long ago. But everyone agreed on one thing. Elias was a man of stories. In the evenings, when the sky turned to ink and the stars blinked into existence one by one, the village children would gather around his porch, and Elias would light an old lantern, a copper one, stained by time, and begin to speak. His stories were unlike any others. He told of faraway lands with seas of glass, forests where the trees whispered your name, and cities built on clouds. He spoke of wars between men and beasts, of kings who traded their crowns for peace, and of lovers who waited lifetimes to meet again. The children sat wide-eyed, hanging on to his every word. But Elias's favorite story, the one he kept locked away from others, was his own. The memory of her. Long ago, when Elias was a young man with hair as black as midnight and hands strong enough to lift stones, he had loved a girl named Era. She had hair the color of ripened wheat and eyes that caught the sun in ways no painter could ever capture. They met under the oak tree, back when it was still a sapling. Elias was planting it with his father, and Ira had wandered by, chasing a butterfly. She stopped, watched him dig, and asked, "Why plant a tree?" "It takes too long to grow." And Elias, with the simple wisdom of youth, answered, "So it'll be here when I'm old." Ira laughed. "Then I'll come and see it when we're both old." They grew up together, seasons passing like pages in a book. Elias promised to marry her the night before he left for the northern lands to find work. It was a time of hardship. The harvest had failed, and many of the village's young men sought their fortunes elsewhere. "I'll be back before the leaves fall," he promised. Ira smiled, though her eyes betrayed a shadow of worry. "Don't make me wait too long." But fate, cruel and indifferent, had other plans. Elias's journey stretched from months to years. Work was scarce, and the war in the north swallowed many. Letters stopped reaching the village, and though Ira waited under the old oak tree for seasons upon seasons, one day she too vanished from the village. When Elias finally returned, a man hardened by labor and grief, the house where Ira once lived stood empty. The fields knew nothing of her, and the oak tree, now tall and proud, bore silent witness to her absence. He asked the old women who sat at their doorsteps, knitting with fingers like twigs, but they only shook their heads. "She waited for you," one whispered. Then one day, "She was gone," another said. No one knew where she went or what became of her. Some believed she left to find Elias. Others thought sorrow had taken her. The truth was lost to the winds. Elias never married, never left the village again. Instead, he built his home beside the oak tree and spoke to its branches each evening as though Ira might be listening. The lantern's flame years turned to decades. The faces in the village changed, but Elias remained, becoming a part of the land itself. The children adored him, and the elders respected his solitude. But Elias's health began to falter. His legs ached in the cold, his vision dimmed, and he felt the weight of his years settling into his bones. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves turned to fire and gold, Elias called the village children to his porch. He lit his old lantern, its flickering light casting dancing shadows on the walls. "I have one last story to tell," he announced. The children, sensing the heaviness in his voice, huddled closer. He spoke of a love that never withered, of promises made under a sapling, of years lost to time, and of an old man who waited under the branches of a tree for someone who never returned. As he finished, his voice barely a whisper, the lantern's flame flickered low. "I planted this tree," he murmured, "for her. And I'll leave this world by its side." The children sat in silence, tears welling in their eyes. They'd never heard this story before, and they knew it was no tale. It was Elias's heart laid bare. When morning came, the villagers found Elias seated beneath the oak, the lantern beside him, long extinguished, a soft smile on his face. He had passed in the night. In his hand was a small, worn ribbon, the color of ripened wheat. Nobody knew where it came from, but some swore that in the quiet dawn, they saw a young woman standing beside him, her hair catching the morning light before vanishing into the mist. Legacy of light, the villagers buried Elias beneath the oak, planting wildflowers around his grave. The lantern was hung on one of the branches, its glass cleaned, its metal polished. And every evening, as dusk painted the sky, one of the villagers would light the lantern in Elias's memory. The children would gather to tell stories, some real, some born of their own imagining. The old oak remained, its branches thick and mighty. Some claimed they heard whispers in its leaves on certain nights. Others said the scent of wheat and wildflowers would drift by when no wind blew. A new keeper years passed. A boy named Thomas came to the village with his widowed mother. Quiet and curious, Thomas was drawn to the oak from the start. While other children climbed its branches, he sat beneath it, reading aloud or sketching its form. Old Margit, the oldest woman in the village, told him Elias's story. That evening, Thomas volunteered to light the lantern. His flame caught, and the scent of wildflowers drifted through the air. He took on the duty, year after year. As the seasons turned, Thomas gathered every scrap of village lore, recording stories before they faded. In time, he too grew old, and another child took his place. The traveler's return. 70 winters later, a traveler arrived. He had no name, no past to speak of, only a yearning. Guided by legend, he found the oak, its branches heavy with age, the lantern long unlit. He struck a match, and against the odds, the flame caught. The scent of wildflowers filled the air. Mist gathered, and in its folds stood a young woman with hair like wheat fields and an old man holding a lantern. They said nothing, but the traveler felt peace. When dawn came, he was gone, leaving only a fresh golden ribbon tied to the branch. And though no village remained, the oak endured. On misty nights, some claimed to see a flickering light, and in its glow, the figures of 2 waiting souls. And so, the story lived on.